Okay. Right. So welcome to the Pursuing Higher Studies podcast event, part of the ongoing 3-week workshop facilitated by a collaboration between Research et al. And the Rotaract Club of PS University. My name is Harshit, and I'll be your host for today's episode. Join me as we talk about the intricacies for creating a great graduate admissions profile. And on today's episode, we have Vishal Vinod, a distant yet immensely impactful mentor of mine. And I still remember the time I emailed him regarding contributing to TensorFlow for Google Summer of Code. And his advice has left me with a summer internship at ISC for the summer of 2020. Vishal Vinod is currently a computer science master's student at the University of California, San Diego, doing his undergraduate. He worked at a research intern at ISC, Bangalore, and the Indian Institute of Technology, Bombay. He's participated in Google Summer of Code in 2019 and 2020 under Google's TensorFlow team. He was a research developer at Microsoft and Inkers AI, and he has multiple notable publications in top-level conferences such as ICCV, AAAI, and ICLR. Welcome, Vishal. How are you doing today?
Oh, I'm doing great.
Yeah, thanks for coming. It's definitely like 5 a.m. in the morning for you right now, right? Must be an early start to the morning.
Right.
Yeah. So for the first question that I have for you today, computer science is a vast field with various subfields and research domains. How did you choose your domain of interest while in undergrad?
So initially in my first and second year, I explored a lot of different courses online, mostly from MIT OpenCourseWare, and many Carnegie Mellon University professors posted all of their content on YouTube. So in my first 2 years or so, I explored a lot of different fields and tried to build a base out of which I can make decisions based on. So I explored web development, virtual reality development, Android development, and so many other things. I was certainly not good at any of them, but I had at least enough background to make a decision whether that was something I wanted to pursue more or not. And my first computer vision related internship was with Inkers AI. And that's where I saw the impact or how interesting computer vision might be. And from there, that's how I built that foundation.
That's wonderful. So if I'm not wrong, at Ink AI, was that an industry-oriented internship or was it more research-oriented?
That was mostly industry oriented. So it was a startup that worked on defense-related applications.
Yeah, and that leads me to ask the question, how do you choose between going into the industry or pursuing research, especially at an undergraduate level?
So you have academic research as well as industry research, and both of them have slightly subtle but different goals. In that, the industry research would obviously have goals of R&D and then productionizing that research into their product. Whereas in academic, it's more open-ended, and generally as an undergrad, you would be working with more senior students, like a PhD student who's already has decided on his thesis direction. So what happens in academic research is you would already have a problem statement ready for you. So you wouldn't have to come up with the ideation part of it. You would just work along with a mentor and solve the problem. In industry research, you would be actively involved in framing that problem itself. So you would have a really good experience from industry research early on, but you're less constrained there. So that would be different.
Yeah, and in terms of like securing an industry level research job at an undergraduate level, it must be a lot more difficult than pursuing a software engineering role, right?
Right.
So how would you? Yeah.
Okay, so most of the internships nowadays already require you to have experience. So it's a little ironic that the same is true for research as well. So what I would say is generally there are like a lot of professors in every university who might have good research problems that they work on, and and it's also a very low bar of entry because very few students would approach them to work on a research problem. So what actually helped me was I reached out to a few profs in my college and asked them if they were working on any problems, because they would generally not have time to pursue those problems even though they have ideas. So I think the best way to get some research experience off the bat would be to reach out to professors who have taught you and you've done well in their course, and then you can ask them if you can work on a project with them. So what happens is you get research experience, and generally in Indian colleges they push you to publish papers. So you would inevitably working toward a publication, and you would also get research experience to add to your resume. So it's a win-win situation in that case. So that way you can get
Yeah.
started.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, especially in PS University, they're making it mandatory for final year students to publish a paper for a letter grade, which is kind of funny. I think about it.
Exactly. Yeah.
So, what do you think are the qualities like people should have when they like want to pursue research at a academic level?
So academic research, there are generally three outcomes of academic research. One is, very rarely, is to start a company out of it, because you would work on a very novel R&D direction that can actually be used on a product. But the most common ones are industry research as well as becoming a professor. So, uh, so how you get started with academic research would be to probably explore a few topics and then find something that really interests you and move forward in that direction. And for that, you would likely have to read a lot of papers. And mostly, generally, journal papers are paywalled by some company. But more recently, especially in computer science, open access has been promoted, and many of the top tier conferences and journals actually have their work, all the papers open access. So we can read some of the papers from industry. For example, in computer vision, you would generally read Facebook AI, or Meta AI, and Google Research. So the thing is, they are actually incentivized to write high quality papers so that it gets more visibility. So if you read such high quality papers, especially from top tier research labs, you'll get a really good idea of how to write a good paper, that is first, and how they formulated the problem and what are the deficiencies that they fixed in their work. So that exposure, I think, would get you started off on research, even at the undergraduate level, because it's open access and available to everyone.
Yeah, definitely. And speaking of doing projects and getting started, many professors advocate for students to the high level research domains like ML for later on in their especially like third or fourth year. And they advise students to develop the basics first, like statistics, linear algebra. So what are your opinions? Should like a student just dive in without knowing any of these fundamentals, or should they like wait, build their basics first, and then tackle these high level challenges?
Yeah, so I see that there are many courses like Fast AI and few other courses that actually promote everyone just diving in deep and then building their foundation on the way, which is, I wouldn't say that's ideal, because you can only go that far with that kind of shaky foundation. But if you're able to go through course, like for example, linear algebra, at least to the level of what Professor Gilbert Strand teaches at MIT. So his lectures are very famous and available online. So if you build foundation of that level early on, you can go farther in your research, and you wouldn't be constrained by harder problems, and you can easily explore different fields. Like, for example, reinforcement learning is it, it's a field that top tier companies and robotics companies generally work on. So reinforcement learning basically means you build agents that interact with environments. So a robot or a game playing agent like chess AI would be an example of that uses good reinforcement learning algorithms. So they generally have slightly more advanced applications of mathematics, including Markov chains and so many other mathematical concepts that people might not learn, and hence they would not explore such areas. So, but if you had a strong background, it gives you the confidence and freedom to explore even complex research directions. So I think a good foundation would help in that.
And I think it'll definitely help in the paper reading process as well. Yeah.
Yes, exactly.
So, I mean, what are the tips and advice for contacting and approaching professors to actually like work under them for projects?
So this is actually two-faced. So if it's in your own university, it would be good if you can take their course and then reach out to them, because what happens is their specialty would generally be in that course, and if you really like their course, then you would have most probably done well in that course, and you can hit it off from there. But I think you're asking about reaching out to different universities. So uh, what I tried was to cold email a lot of professors. So what I would do is I would just go to their Google Scholar page, see their most recent few papers, and I would just read their abstract and get an idea of what the paper is. And then I would draft a cold email where I would quickly summarize that papers that I read, and then I'd say why I find it interesting, and I would demonstrate fit with that. I would say I've taken these courses online. I've read these papers, and maybe if I had any related project, I would talk about that and then say, hey, I'm interested in working with you. I do not expect any stipend because I'm here to learn and work on a research project. So would you like to, is there any project that I can collaborate with you? So
Yeah.
yeah, what happens is most people would say no. No one would say no to free labor. So many times professors might reach out to you, and yeah, so you could try something like that.
Yeah. I think the time that I was working under Professor Anurag Kumar last year for IAS, one of my fellow interns, that's exactly what he did. So he read a couple of papers and he actually emailed the professor. So the first time he emailed him, there was no response. And he happened to follow up again. And that's when he got the response and also followed by the internship.
Yeah,
So
so
yeah.
you can also try this for since now almost everything is remote. You could also try foreign universities, because I've seen a lot of people from I think IIIT Hyderabad and a few other colleges who get internships at Purdue, Carnegie Mellon, and foreign universities. Although it's not paid and it's remote, but you get that world-class research experience. So you could also cold email professors abroad.
Right. Yeah. And in addition to just reaching out to professors, what about these paid internships that are either abroad or what are some great opportunities?
Oh yeah. So within India, I think there are a few. One is at the Chennai Mathematical Institute. So CMI has a good mathematics, statistics-based internship, and even the ISER Kolkata and ISER Pune, I think they also have good computer science internships. I think every year except last year, IISc has a CSA summer internship. So that's the Computer Science and Automation Department. So they have an internship for all the core, generally not non-machine learning, the core computer science, including quantum computing and all of that, the research in core computer science. And then the IAS Summer Fellowship, or the Indian Academy of Sciences Summer Fellowship, where the IITs, NITs, and IIITs have projects. Uh, and the good thing about IAS Summer Fellowship is that the bar is low. So even if you're an undergrad in the first year or second year, and you're willing to explore a topic, there's a high chance that you can get selected, because very few people know about it and apply for it. So if you can get good research experience in your university and an IAS Summer Fellowship, you already have 2 research internships in your resume, and you can build on that. And if mostly foreign internships would be like Carnegie Mellon's Robotics Institute Summer School program, RISS. ETH Zurich has a really good summer fellowship. I think the robotics one just closed computer science closed last month, I think. But in general, you can get really good internships. Like CERN in Geneva, Switzerland has high particle physics internships. So yeah, so there are a lot, and even the MIT ACS, Canadian internships. So I guess, yeah, my tax. So generally, it depends on your university. My university was certainly not in their list, but I think PES might be. So if you could get that sorted, you can.
Yeah, I mean, so PS was on that list until this year, which this year they just didn't opt to get on the list. And it was very frustrating for me because I was looking forward to applying there the entire year last year. And so when I found out that PS wasn't on the list, it was devastating for me.
It's actually very advantageous because the universities abroad, I mean, they don't get too much competition for unpaid remote interns. So, and they're also more eager to write you a letter of recommendation. So if even if you don't publish anything, and you're applying for grad school or master's or PhD programs, they would write you a good letter of recommendation, and they're well known in the US, so that would boost your application. Yeah, so I think MIT SES you could just see, because what happens is if you're an MIT SES intern, my tax intern, you get 15,000 Canadian dollars stipend towards your master's program, and you're almost guaranteed an admit in that university. So that way, I think it's worth talking to your college, and yeah.
Definitely. And something that we left out was Google Summer of Code. In fact, the applications are starting. I think it already started. The organizations are out, and soon we'll contact the organization mentors and the process will begin. So can you tell us a little bit about your experience at TensorFlow and also on like your application process for Google Summer of Code?
Sure. So generally, everyone who participates in Google Summer of Code would attempt it in terms of a software engineering internship, because most of the projects are open source software related projects. But I had a slightly different view of it, because I wanted to work on a research oriented project. So what I did was, I looked at, generally there are around 199 to 206 organizations that participate every year. I'm not sure this year, I've not checked. So what I did was, I went through almost all the organizations and saw if any of the organizations had mentors on their project list that were professors at a university or a PhD student at a university. So I found quite a few organizations like that. And what I did was, I shortlisted them. So there were about 25 or so. So this included Harvard's Berkman Klein, University of California, Santa Cruz had a, I think, biocomputation based internship, project. And then CERN from Switzerland. There are many like that. So including TensorFlow. So TensorFlow had research oriented projects. So once I was able to shortlist organizations that fit my interest, I think if you're into web development, you have a lot more choices. Almost every organization has a web related project. So once you shortlist those projects, the best thing you could do is start reaching out to the mentors as early as possible, because most of the people would draft their proposal at the last minute and would simply spam the organizers or the mentors at the last minute. So it's best if you get started early. And the best way to make an impact on your application would be to get started on the project in this phase itself. So what happens is you're already discussing with your mentor, getting your doubts clarified, and you're actually making a few contributions even before the coding period has started. So what that signals to the mentor, the Google Summer of Code mentor, that you're committed to the project and you already are up to speed with the code base, and you can immediately start working on the project. So they're more than likely to, accept your proposal because they already know that you've been contributing. And if you already started contributing now, even before the coding period has started or even the application period is complete, you would already have at least a few pull requests that you can list on your proposal. So that makes for a very strong proposal and very, very high chance of you getting selected. It's almost guaranteed because you already interacted with the mentor, you've made contributions, you already have a strong proposal because of the pull request that you've already made, and you're already ready to start working on the project because you don't have to understand the code base once the program starts. So I think that would be the almost guaranteed way to get selected for a Google Summer of Code project.
Yeah.
And and it also helps if you are interested in some of the famous organizations like Python Software, CERN, to an extent TensorFlow. Such organizations actually get a lot of students participating. I mean, applying. So you can stand out by starting early and
Yeah.
about that.
You were part of Google Summer of Code 2 times, not once, right?
Right.
What was your motivation for applying for the second time?
Okay, so the first time I did not expect to get selected, so that was I was fortunate, I guess. The second time I was more purposeful because I had actually, this was in fall 2020, so I had actually applied for just 5 master's programs for fall 2020 because I wasn't sure if I could get in or not, and unfortunately I didn't get any admit that time. So I applied to Google Summer of Code, and I wanted to attempt Google Summer of Code as a research internship with a mentor from Google. So I applied only to TensorFlow. So what happened was, although it was not a completely research-oriented project, it was a computer vision project that I really liked to work on. And then the mentor was really supportive, and I actually got his letter of recommendation when I was applying for grad school. And I actually got an admit the next time. So my purpose was slightly different. In addition to contributing to an open source project, I looked at it in terms of an internship and committed to it in that way, not as an open source project. So that was the only difference. So I think even you could, I mean, anyone who's interested could look at some of the good organizations which are actually well known, like Wikimedia, CERN, and then there are a lot of good organizations like TensorFlow, Cloud CV. Actually, you can look at Cloud CV because they have mentors from Tesla and Tesla in Mobi, and they also have the project was started at Georgia Tech. So the professors from Georgia Tech, Professor Devi Parekh and Professor Dhruv Batra, so they generally interact with the students as well. And I've seen a few people get admitted to Georgia Tech after doing Google Summer of Code at Cloud CV. So yeah, you could take a look at that.
That's nice. Yeah, and are you like religiously passionate about open source? Like, what do you think open source is doing for the research community, especially with Google's AI like projects? Everything like TensorFlow itself is open source. A lot. There's a big push in the ML community to make everything open source, like Hugging Face. I think their code base is also open source, and it's driving this innovation because the greater reach, the more amount of people who are contributing. There's a bigger community, a lot more workforce.
Oh yes, yes. So generally, everyone at least in the machine learning research community, push for open source because how ubiquitous compute has become right now. So Colab, Kaggle notebooks, and access to compute has become more universal, and mostly research now has reached a point where reproducibility of the research experiments is very important. So everyone, including industry research labs as well as academic research labs, want to get a lot of visibility to their work, and the best way to do that is to put their code out there, and the code should work actually. So reproducibility of the code that's like made available. So it should be good quality code, and it should be accessible to everyone. So the best way to do that would be to make the code base open source on GitHub and Bitbucket. So that is the general motivation of making everything open source. In terms of libraries like Hugging Face, TensorFlow, PyTorch, uh, that also democratizes a lot of the research because as the project develops, more and more advanced, like you could say, the different layers that go into developing a deep learning architecture, and all of those are already pre-implemented and ready to use out of the box. So no one has to reinvent the wheel and then start from scratch, because a lot of it has already been done and very efficiently at that. So you can build on top of that. So that open source plays a really good role. And also because TensorFlow, because more people who use TensorFlow would use Google Cloud Platform, and then they get more customers for it. So there are some incentives like that as well.
Yeah. Speaking about compute, I remember in one of your 100 Days of ML projects, you built a deep learning rig. So I wanted to ask you, like, why should someone invest in a deep learning rig, especially if they're going into the field of machine learning? Should they invest in one, or should they just stick to collab and that'll suit all of their needs?
Yeah, in hindsight, I think I did actually use my deep learning rig at that time, because I think it was late 2018. But I think now you wouldn't have to build a deep learning rig, because you have a lot of easy to use, fast, and high compute resources available to you. And I think even PES might have some compute resources available. But I think the best way to do that would be to work with a university, and then, like I said, you would cold email a few profs and work with them. They would already have the compute ready for you, so you don't have to purchase anything as such. So I think that would be really good.
Right. Yeah. So a lot of these professors might work for a lab and they'll have access to high compute through that lab. Yeah. I think ML and AI is a rage these days, and a lot of people jump into this domain thinking, oh, wow, it's very hot in the industry right now, and I want to pursue it to like maybe make a lot of money, get a job at Google or Facebook. But what do you think about this? Like, what should people be aware of, especially for jumping into ML and AI?
Yeah, so most of the top companies might actually be doing good research-oriented work with ML and actually productionizing it. But it's actually a hype for the most part, especially for like new startups. They generally drive the hype cycle, and then it might crash somewhere. So if anyone is like going for it only for the money or because of the hype, then I wouldn't say that's the right way to go about it, because it would be short term and you wouldn't get much out of it. Yeah, so I wouldn't, at least in my opinion, I wouldn't advise that.
Yeah, and I think people don't realize that it's a very mathematical oriented field. In addition to the computer science involved, you got to really know like linear algebra and statistics.
Yeah, otherwise it's just used as a black box. So yeah, as a software engineer who works on ML applications, it makes sense, because it would help in productionizing that ML architecture. But if one wants to be a research oriented like developer, then it becomes harder without the math background.
Yeah, and there's some ethical problems when you just use ML models as like a black box, right? Especially with recommender systems. If you don't really understand that algorithm, it could lead to very drastic recommendations. Especially, I want to bring up the example of the election that happened a few years ago in America, where Facebook was driving a very democratic approach to everyone who wanted to see that. It wasn't really providing different opinions. They just provided what they wanted to see on Facebook. And so, like, how do we like avoid these problems?
These are actually hard problems, because most of what social media is a self-fulfilling loop. So people are shown what they would like to see, so that they spend more time on the platform. So that is fundamentally wrong. So it's hard to solve for that, but mostly, so that is why Web3 and decentralized internet is Web3 is picking up right now, because people want decentralization, and no one should have centralized access to controlling your attention. So that's a good direction, but even that needs some kind of regulation. So yeah, so that is actually an issue. But there is a lot of research on interpretability of the predictions that are made by models these days. So there are fields such as interpretability of ML research, and there's another thing called adversarial robustness. So these are two directions that talk about how we can not have a black box approach to machine learning, and you can actually interpret why a certain decision was made by that ML agent. And then robustness would fit to making errors based on biases and such sensitive topics that you wouldn't want to be wrong in.
Yeah.
So controversial topics.
Yeah. I think a lot of the people attending this meeting are either in their second year or their third year. They're going to be applying or thinking about applying to graduate schools. So what exactly are some things to keep in mind during this process? What makes their application better in terms of like, should they have 1 year of work experience or should they just apply directly in their fourth year?
So it actually helps to apply in your final year itself, because you would still be in an academic setting, and then it'd be a good transition to an academic setting. And what happens is, if you get a good admit, you also have the option of deferring it by a year. So if you choose to go for a job, you can go for it with the backup that you have at least one admit in your hand, because you can accept and defer one admit. So in terms of keeping all your options open, that's one thing. So if you apply in a final year, there's a good chance if you make a good choice of the universities you apply to, you will get at least one admit. And then with that admit in hand, you can apply to more ambitious universities a year with work experience if you choose to go that route. Or if you're happy with the admit you got, you could go immediately. So it keeps all your options open. And in terms of building the application, the best way to start would probably be at the end of your second year, probably. So you either work with a prof within your university or cold email a few profs, and like at good universities in India or abroad, and start to work on a project with them. Even if it's not a research oriented project, there would be a software engineering oriented project as well. So you would be working on any of the code, like systems, quantum computing, web. They're like almost every field in computer science. So you would get to work operating systems as well. So there's a lot of research in that. So once you have something on your resume, you can start applying to internships, like industry or research internships. So the best way to build your profile is to get as many known names as possible in your resume. So if you can, so that actually helps you get filtered. It would help you pass the filtration process in the graduate school applications. Because if you're working at, actually, if you work at startups, you learn a lot, but then there's no way for the graduate committee abroad to calibrate how hard the work you did actually was. So they may just, even if you worked really, really hard, 80 hours a week in a startup and learned a lot in that time, it'll be hard for them to gauge that with respect to some of these internships where the students pay them money and then learn something. So those kind of internships also exist in India. So it will be hard to for them to calibrate what happened in that. So they would treat both of them the same, which is not ideal. So if you can get a lot out of that internship, like maybe publish research or productionize something, and you can talk about what impact you had in that internship, then that's great. So you can totally build a good profile based on that.
I see. So you spoke a lot about these internships. How does GPA and GRE scores stack up to your internship experience?
So at least in the US, the universities are generally stacked as a few tiers. So there's like top, mid, and low tier, which generally people build based on the profile that they have, the GRE scores and the GPAs. So generally the top tier, not just the top 5 or something, the top 25, top 50 or so. So these universities would generally have GRE and GPA as just the filter. So if you're over a certain bar, your application would go to the review committee, and they would actually review your profile and your statement of purpose and all of the other application material. And then if there's a good fit, they may admit you. But as you go lower down the tier, just these numbers alone play a more important role. So if you have a good GPA or GRE score, they assume that you'll be able to do well in their coursework, and then they would admit you. So it actually depends on where you're aiming at.
That's interesting. I always thought GRE and GPA scores had a very high impact on the top, 25 colleges.
Oh yes. So the high impact, by that I mean just having a high GPA and GRE does not guarantee you an admit.
Mhm.
It just means that they would review your profile. So if you have a good profile as well as a really good GRE score, like 325 or 330 plus in the GRE out of 340, then your profile is good for any of the universities. So yes. So it does play a very important role.
Yeah, so what do you think like a good range for GPA is? I think it definitely depends on what college you're going to. So it's relative, but what's a secure range like someone should have?
So for Indian universities, anything over 9 is like good. I mean, I think best gives a little generously compared to other universities, but so that's really good. And then 8.5 is also fine. I think even 8 is okay, but the thing is, as you go lower down there, your ability to get through the filtration process becomes harder. So what happens is, if you're applying to a PhD program with a low GPA, it's very, very hard to justify how you didn't do that well academically, but you still want to go deeper into academia. It'll be hard to prove that with a lower GPA. So that's an issue. But then for master's program, since it's mostly professional based, and people who go to the program within 1.5 to 2 years, they would graduate and go to industry. GPA doesn't matter too much. So your work experience and your internships would matter a lot more.
I see. Yeah, and how do you maximize your chance of getting into a top tier college, especially in the United States? And maybe you could also talk about other areas like Canada or Australia. Is the United States the only place you applied to?
No, I applied to Canada as well. But so if you speak about top tier universities, I think EPFL and ETH Zurich in Switzerland, uh, the top 6 or so in Canada, and then I think the top 25, 30 in the US, and I think University of Melbourne, and there's another RMIT, I think, in Australia. So I think few in Australia are like really good for most fields and computer science. So like across the board, they're pretty good. In terms of maximizing your chances, so as I said, the first filter criteria that most universities look at is your numbers, because that's easy to filter on, and then it's just a clear indicator. Look, if it's over a certain threshold, we can review your profile or not. So that's a clear indicator for them, and easy because like they would get thousands of applications for I think 200 250 seats at max. So they would already filter out more than half just by the numbers. So it's really good if you have a good GPA. I understand that it's not ideal to aim for a high GPA, especially in undergrad, because it's better that you explore and build your skills than work on coursework. But it doesn't hurt you to have a high GPA, because it gives you a lot of benefits in terms, even if you're applying off campus for any internships, your GPA would shine on your resume, which shouldn't be the case, but unfortunately that's the case. So your GPA and GRE would be your first stone, and then if you can get so it's the coolest thing you could do is if you have a few universities that you want to work at, I mean you want to study at, you could try to find ways to collaborate with the professors there, because the best way to get an admit is to get a letter of recommendation from that professor itself, from that university. So because they trust that letter writer more than anybody else, because most of the Indian profs, okay, PES does have a few good profs, but at least when I had applied, they would not know any of my profs as letter writers, so they may not be inclined to trust their recommendation of me, because the prof recommending me itself is not a well established or good researcher. So yeah, actually, if all of you are interested in Google Summer of Code, you could in addition to seeing what all organizations are there, you could also make a list of uh, academic universities that have projects. So CERN, Cloud CV, I think. Yeah, Cloud CV. Even Open CV also has some research-oriented projects. I think Harvard's Berkman Klein, and then there's an organization called, I think, CCC, which is some Canadian Cancer Genomics Institute. And then even Indiana University Bloomington has some projects. I think there was a project from Stanford sometime I'd seen. So these are generally come under some umbrella organizations. So CERN generally has few different projects in it. So you can actually take a look at such projects, and then what happens is you're indirectly working with them. So it's not exactly an internship, but it's also an internship. So it really helps your resume in that way.
Yeah. It's awesome. And I think there's also Red Hen Lab. I think that's associated with UCLA.
UCLA.
Yeah.
UCLA. Yeah. And actually their projects are really good because it generally it's completely end to end. So you need to work from scratch till productionizing it for them. So that's really good. Red Hen Labs is really good.
Yeah. And their proposal part is actually quite difficult as well because they want you to take the full incentive. Yeah. Could you tell us your experience as being a reviewer at NeurIPS? I saw that.
So NeurIPS is top. It's the best ML conference. So core machine learning conference. So neural information processing system. So NeurIPS. So I was a reviewer in that because I had actually submitted a paper to it from IISc. So the review. Okay. So here's something that I don't think like generally who are early in their research career would not know. Let's say, for example, the top tier computer vision conference is called CVPR. So CVPR is the Computer Vision and Pattern Recognition Conference, and it is the best for computer vision. And the deadline to submit your paper is somewhere in the end of November. So what happens is, and the conference is in June. So there is actually a 6-month period between when the paper was submitted to the conference and when it was actually presented at the conference. 6 to 7 months difference. So as a reviewer, you will be reviewing the paper within a month of the paper being submitted to the conference. So if you're reviewing, you will be given papers that are very relevant to your field of interest. So since you would have submitted, let's say I submitted a paper related to a very niche topic in computer vision, you would be given papers in that niche. So
okay.
Yeah, so what happens is you will get to read state-of-the-art papers as soon as they are published and ready to go. As a reviewer, I mean, right now I think most of the people put it on archive. So archive is an open access, free to access preprint of a paper. So it's not published, it's just put there so that people can view it earlier. But in general, many, at least academic labs, they do not want in some industry lab to copy their idea and do it faster than them and better than them. So they generally don't post it on archive early. So once the paper is accepted in a conference, they would post it on archive. So what happens as a reviewer, you get to read the top papers months in advance before it is actually made public. So that by the time a next conference deadline comes, you are already read some of the state-of-the-art papers, and you can work on better ideas there.
Yeah. It's kind of like a cycle, right? I mean, if you submit a paper in here, you're reviewing for the next time, you almost are guaranteed to have the top level research.
Exactly.
Yeah, and you're currently, or I think previously, did a research internship at Microsoft or Meta. How did that experience go?
Oh, so I'd like to clarify that it's not exactly an internship. So there's a Microsoft has a program similar to Google Summer of Code. So it's called Reinforcement Learning Open Source Fest. So RLOSF is an open source program where students get to work on a research project with Microsoft's and New York City team on their Vaupal Babbitt framework. So Vaupal Babbitt is an open source organization open source software that works on, it's called contextual bandits. So these are generally used for recommendation systems. and it's really fast. And yes, so Microsoft actually, it was actually part of Yahoo, and then when Microsoft purchased Yahoo, that team went under Microsoft Research at New York City. So that was the project I worked on. So this was mostly because I had already worked on TensorFlow, and I was the project was somewhat similar, but for a different framework in C++. So yeah, that was a really good experience because I was preparing to go to graduate school, but I was still eligible to participate in that program. So it was similar to a mini internship at that part.
Yeah. Do you think publications or having multiple publications affects your graduate admission like profile? Or like does it matter on what conference you publish to? Like what are exactly the details on that?
Okay, so you should probably look at it this way. So if so basically what a conference does is it signals to whoever's viewing your profile, if they know about that domain, that you are good, your research skills are good enough to publish at these venues. So if you're applying for research-oriented master's programs, the committee reviewing your profile would be familiar with what are the top tier conferences or journals in that domain. So if they see that you publish in the same conferences or venues that they also publish at, so that's a signal that you are at par to work with them. So they're more likely to look at your profile favorably. So what generally happens in Indian colleges is that a course project is taken and then forcefully put into into a paper format and submitted to a conference which is unknown generally. And I like not like saying, I'm saying from my experience.
Right.
So what would be better is to, even for course projects, to work on a slightly research oriented direction and look at the top conferences and workshops, conferences and journals in your domain. For example, for robotics, there's ICRA or ICRA, and then IROS. And then for computer vision, there's CVPR, ICCV. For ML, there is AAAI and NeurIPS. So similarly for different fields. So I think for web, there's something called WWW. So all of these top conferences and journals might have something called as a workshop track. So what happens is these workshop tracks are more niche oriented. So CVPR would be like computer vision, but then the CVPR workshops would be like for computational photography, would be for action recognition, image segmentation. So they will be more niche. And what happens is they have a lower bar for the paper to be accepted, and you still get the conference name on your profile. So what happens is you can start off submitting to, there's also something called extended abstract, which is a 2-page summary of your research work, which is generally only for undergrad and master students. So these extended abstracts are a platform for you to talk more about your research at a top tier conference. So the bar is very low, but you get that exposure to collaborate and talk to different people at the conferences and also get something on your resume, a good publication at top tier venue. So generally you should start off with workshop papers at top tier venues because you still get ICLR. So my ICLR paper is not a full main conference paper, it's a workshop paper. So, but then at ICLR, I got to explore and, although it was virtual, I got to explore and talk to different researchers there. And generally, if you can talk to researchers at a conference, you can directly ask them if they have openings for research positions at their university. So you can network that way as well.
Yeah, that's awesome. And I think so far we've talked about graduate admissions in the viewpoint of CS and ML. But what if you're maybe going into something that's more technical, like software engineering, and you want to pursue masters? Is that still a good option? Should people go for that?
Sure, why not? So it's a bias. Like most of what I've told might be biased towards ML, but most of the core computer science research actually has a lot more value than just ML right now. So if someone is just interested in software engineering or industry oriented master's programs, then your work experience and internship projects and course projects actually matter more. And generally, these projects are supposed to let you demonstrate good fit with the professors at that university. Like if you're working on, let's say, a blockchain related project, then you can actually apply to very specific niche programs at, I think, University of Alberta in Canada, and then maybe at Harvard. So they have somewhat niche programs in that domain. So if you have good projects and if you can demonstrate good fit with the prof, then that's more than enough.
But in terms of like the courses, is there a great difference between undergraduate and master's level?
Oh yes. So uh, so yeah. So that's there because masters, at least at UCSD, are more like research oriented. So there's a lot of mathematical foundation to all the homeworks and assignments that we get, and it's a lot more rigorous than undergrad. So undergrads generally here take 5 courses, whereas grads take only 3 courses because they're more intense for master students. So in terms of the intensity of the coursework and the pace at which it is taught, you're already expected to know everything from undergrad, at least the basics. So you're generally building on top of that. And at least for me, I didn't have a really good undergrad education, so I had to play catch up for most part. So it was, at least for me, it was a little intense. Yeah, generally that's the thing for most students, actually, pretty intense.
I see. Yeah, and it's also probably a great segue to getting a job in foreign places, right? I think doing a master's in CS might give you a good opening for getting a software job at like the US.
Uh, I have not, I'm actually looking at a thesis. So mostly I'll be working on a thesis towards the summer. But yeah, yes. So the exact same person with the same resume, but with just the master's university added to the top, would get more interviews than just without it. This only works very early in your career. So once you have a few years of work experience, none of that would matter. So just off the bat, when you immediately after graduating, only then does the university name play a role. So yeah, so once you have a few years of work experience, like no one would care which university you went to at all. So yeah, so that helps just the first step of college.
Yeah. So with the master's thesis, are you looking forward to pursuing PhD?
I want to keep that option open. So that is the reason why I'm going for a thesis. Also because at least UCSD has the option of converting from a master's to a PhD. So this is done because it's harder to get a PhD admit from undergrad, especially because it's hard to get good research experience during undergrad, and also because PhD, there are very few seats because each prof would at max have 1 or 2 openings only. So they would pick only 1 or 2 students who they feel is a good fit. And you're also competing with people in the US who have recommenders who are known to the prof beforehand. So it's harder to get a PhD admit because it's fully funded. So basically, what a PhD admit is the prof would be funding you. They would be paying you $500,000 for over a period of 5 years to fund your research. So the question that the prof would ask is, would I pay this person's profile? I mean, just from their profile, would I pay this person $500,000 to fund their research? So from that point of view, it's very hard for them to part with a lot of money because someone else gives it to them and then they hand it over. So in terms of that, a better strategy would be to find a strong fit and also improve your profile by having a master's degree, and then find out if research is something for you. So I chose not to sit for placements. Instead, I did an internship at IIT Bombay, and then I did a 1 year full-time, research assistant position at Indian Institute of Science to find out if research is something that is a good fit for me or not. So that is still an exploratory phase. So if someone is just wants to get an industry-oriented job, then you wouldn't have to worry too much about applying to PhD programs. But if you want to find out if PhD, since it's a significant commitment of the best years of your life, generally, like PhD is done early on in your career because you are at your intellectually most active during your 22 to 30 or so. So you would work on the most intense and most hard projects at that period of time in your life. So it's a trade-off. So if you are really considering PhD, you should make sure that you have some research experience to know that PhD is for you or not, because it's very difficult for you to drop out in between, and because it's a long time commitment. So
Yeah. Awesome, Vishal. Thanks so much for coming today. I think we started off a little bit late, but we covered a lot of great questions. And hopefully the recording will go up on our YouTube page. A lot of people will have access to this.
okay.
We'll definitely love to have you again on another episode if you're definitely free. We have a lot of questions we could ask you. Yep. So thank you.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah. Have fun at UCSD. Let me know how it goes, and hopefully we'll meet one day.
Oh, sure. Yes, that's
Yeah. Awesome.
Thank you.
All right. Thank you.
Thank you.